The inheritance notice arrived on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday, which should have been my first warning. Nothing good ever comes disguised as ordinary paperwork. My great-uncle Martin had died, a man I'd met exactly twice in my 34 years, both times at funerals, where he'd lurked in corners like a piece of forgotten furniture. The lawyer's letter was brief and businesslike. I was now the owner of 47 acres in northern Maine and a cabin that had been in the family since 1962. No mortgage, no liens, just mine. The catch, because there's always a catch, was that I had to visit the property within 30 days to claim it, or it would default to the state. I almost didn't go. Should have listened to that instinct. But Sarah had left me 3 months earlier, taking half our savings and all of our shared future, and my apartment in Portland felt like a mausoleum of failed dreams. A free cabin in the woods seemed like exactly the kind of cosmic compensation the universe owed me. At minimum, it would be something to sell. The drive took 4 hours through increasingly desolate terrain. The GPS lost signal after the first hour, but the lawyer had provided hand-drawn directions on the back of his business card, a detail that should have struck me as odd, but somehow felt charmingly rustic at the time. Turn left at the dead oak, right at the stone bridge. Follow the dirt road until it splits, then take the path that looks less traveled. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by towering pines that blotted out most of the October sky. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 800 square feet of weathered cedar logs and a tin roof painted forest green. A stone chimney rose from one end, and a small porch wrapped around the front and one side. It looked like something from a postcard, if postcards featured buildings that seemed to be holding their breath. I parked my Honda beside what I assumed was a woodshed and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. The silence was absolute in a way that city dwellers never experience. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors arguing through thin walls. Just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of something that might have been a loon. The key was where the lawyer said it would be, under a loose board on the porch. The lock turned easily, as if it had been waiting for me. The interior was spartanly furnished but clean, as though someone had been maintaining it. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by built-in bookshelves filled with volumes on forestry, local history, and what appeared to be field guides to northern wildlife. A small kitchen occupied one corner, complete with a propane refrigerator and a cast-iron stove that belonged in a museum. The bedroom was barely large enough for a double bed and a dresser, and the bathroom was an exercise in efficiency. But it was the desk by the window that caught my attention. It sat beneath the cabin's single large window, which faced west toward a view of endless forest. The desk was handmade, probably by my great-uncle, with careful dovetailed joints and a surface worn smooth by decades of use. On it sat a kerosene lamp, a fountain pen, and a leather-bound journal. I approached it the way you might approach a sleeping animal, carefully, ready to retreat. The journal was bound in dark brown leather that had aged to the color of dried blood. No title or markings on the cover, just smooth leather that felt warm to the touch despite the cabin's chill. I opened it to the first page, expecting to find my great-uncle's handwriting, his thoughts on solitude or observations about wildlife. Instead, I found my own name written in my own handwriting at the top of the page. David Chen, October 15th. My hand shook as I flipped to the next page, more of my handwriting filling page after page in neat, careful script that was undeniably mine. I recognized the way I dotted my I's, the slight leftward slant of my letters, the particular way I formed my capital letters. This was my handwriting, but I had never written any of these words. The first entry was dated October 15th, today. Arrived at the cabin around 3:30 p.m. The drive was longer than expected, but the directions were accurate. The key was under the porch board, just as promised. The silence here is remarkable, almost oppressive. I found this journal on the desk by the window. I don't remember buying it, but then again, I don't remember a lot of things clearly these days. I checked my watch, 3:45 p.m. The cabin is in better condition than I anticipated. Someone has been taking care of it, though there's no evidence of recent habitation. The refrigerator is empty, but clean. There's firewood stacked neatly by the fireplace and kindling in a wicker basket. The bed has been made with military precision. I looked around the cabin, confirming each detail as I read it. The firewood was exactly where the journal said it would be. The kindling basket sat beside the fireplace, filled with carefully split pieces of birch and pine. I should explore the property while there's still daylight, but something about this place makes me reluctant to venture far from the cabin. There's a sense of being watched, though I haven't seen any signs of other people. Maybe it's just the psychological effect of isolation. Sarah always said I was too paranoid for my own good. Note: check the shed behind the cabin. There might be tools or equipment worth keeping. I closed the journal, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was impossible. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd written this earlier and forgotten. Maybe the stress of the divorce and the move had affected my memory more than I realized. But I would remember writing something this detailed, this specific. I opened the journal again and flipped through more pages, entry after entry in my handwriting, describing events I hadn't experienced, thoughts I hadn't thought. The entries progressed chronologically: October 16th, 17th, 18th, future dates. October 16th's entry: slept poorly. The silence here is more unsettling than any noise could be. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing there. Just moonlight filtering through the trees, creating shadows that seemed to shift and move. Found something disturbing in the shed today. Tools, as expected, but also what appears to be surveillance equipment. Old cameras, long lens attachments, and photographs. Lots of photographs. I'm not in any of them, but the locations are clearly around this property. Someone has been watching this place for a long time. The nearest neighbor is supposedly 12 miles away according to the property survey, but I found a path leading north from the cabin that shows signs of regular use. Fresh footprints in the mud, size 10 or 11 boots. I wear size 11. I stopped reading and looked at my feet. Size 11 boots, the same ones described in the journal. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. But who would go to such lengths? And how could someone replicate my handwriting so perfectly? I'd taken a graphology course in college for fun, and I knew enough about handwriting analysis to recognize that this wasn't just a good forgery. This was my hand, my pen pressure, my rhythm. I flipped ahead to October 18th. David, if you're reading this, don't panic. I know how this looks. I know how impossible it seems. I thought the same thing when I first found this journal. Yes, I'm writing to you. Or rather, you're writing to yourself. I'm you, 3 days from now, and I'm trying to help you understand what's happening before it's too late. The cabin isn't what it appears to be. Neither is the inheritance. Martin didn't leave you this place, he escaped from it. And now it has you. Listen carefully. Do not follow the north path. Do not explore the shed tonight. Do not trust what you see in the mirrors after dark. And whatever you do, do not try to leave until you've read everything I've written. If you leave now, you'll just end up back here, but you'll have lost time. Days, maybe weeks. And each time you return, you'll remember less of the outside world and more of this place, until there's nothing left of who you were before. I'm you, David, and I'm running out of time to explain. I slammed the journal shut and stepped back from the desk as if it had burst into flames. This was insane. This was impossible. I was having some kind of breakdown, stress-induced hallucinations brought on by the divorce and the isolation. But my hands were shaking, and the handwriting in that journal was undeniably mine. I looked out the window again,
The sun was setting, painting the pine trees black against an orange sky. Soon it would be dark, and I would be alone in this cabin with a journal that somehow contained my future, written in my own hand. I walked to the front door and tried the handle. It turned easily. I stepped outside onto the porch and breathed the cool October air, crisp with the smell of decomposing leaves and wood smoke from some distant source. My Honda sat exactly where I had parked it. The keys were in my pocket. I could leave. I could drive back to Portland and forget about this place, let it default to the state as threatened. I could check myself into a psychiatric facility and get the help I apparently needed.
But as I stood there, looking at my car, I found that I couldn't quite remember the drive here. I remembered leaving Portland, remembered following the hand-drawn directions, but the details were fuzzy, like trying to recall a dream after waking. How many hours had it taken? What radio stations had I listened to? Had I stopped for gas? The gaps in my memory were small but troubling. And now that I was paying attention, I realized I couldn't quite remember checking out of my apartment either. Had I given notice to my landlord? Had I forwarded my mail? I walked back inside and picked up the journal again, flipping to the entry dated October 18th, the one where I was supposedly writing to myself. You're standing by the door right now, aren't you? Thinking about leaving. You tried the handle, stepped outside, looked at your car, but you can't quite remember how you got here, can you? That's the first sign, the memory gaps. They start small, little details about the journey, things that don't seem important, but they spread. Soon you won't remember much about your life before the cabin. Sarah's face will fade. Your job, your friends, your favorite coffee shop, all of it will become vague and distant, like something you read in a book once. But you'll remember this place perfectly. Every detail of the cabin, every tree in the forest, every stone in the path. This place has a way of replacing your memories with itself. I set the journal down again and tried to think about my life in Portland. Sarah's face came easily. Dark hair, green eyes, the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident. But when I tried to remember our last conversation, the one where she told me she was leaving, the details were strangely elusive. I remembered the broad strokes. She was unhappy, she needed space, she was taking half the savings, but I couldn't recall her exact words or where the conversation had taken place. My job as a freelance graphic designer was similarly hazy. I could remember having clients, remember working on projects, but specific details escaped me. What was the last project I'd completed? When was the last time I'd invoiced someone? I was probably just tired. It had been a long day, a stressful few months. Memory lapses were normal under such circumstances. But the journal knew about my memory problems before I'd noticed them myself. I flipped to October 19th. By now, you're starting to doubt your own perceptions. That's normal. The human mind resists accepting impossible things, even when the evidence is overwhelming. Let me prove this is real. Tomorrow morning, you'll wake up at exactly 6:47 a.m. You'll make coffee using the beans you'll find in the kitchen cabinet, French roast, still sealed in a bag you don't remember buying. While the coffee brews, you'll step outside to check the weather and see a red cardinal land on the porch railing. It will stay for exactly 37 seconds before flying north toward the path. You'll spend the morning reading more of this journal, and around 11 a.m., you'll decide to examine the shed despite my warnings. You'll find the surveillance equipment I mentioned, along with photographs dating back decades. In one of them, you'll see a man who looks exactly like you standing in front of this cabin. The photograph will be dated 1987, 8 years before you were born. That afternoon, you'll try to leave. You'll pack your things, get in your car, and drive toward the main road.
but you'll find that the dirt road loops back on itself, just like the north path. No matter which direction you drive, you'll end up back at the cabin. You'll tell yourself you made a wrong turn, that you're just disoriented. You'll try again and again. By evening, you'll realize the truth. This place doesn't let go easily. But don't despair, David. I'm writing this to help you break the cycle. There is a way out, but it requires understanding what this place is and why it chose you. Keep reading. Your life depends on it. I checked my watch, 9:30 p.m. If the journal was right, I would wake up at 6:47 a.m. and find French roast coffee beans in the kitchen cabinet. It was a specific, testable prediction. I walked to the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the coffee maker, empty except for a few mismatched dishes and a spider web in the corner. No coffee beans, French roast or otherwise. Relief flooded through me. The journal was wrong, which meant it was just elaborate fiction, probably written by my deceased great-uncle as some kind of Gothic novel. Martin had always been eccentric, according to family stories. This was probably his idea of entertainment, a ghost story to spook whoever inherited the cabin. I made myself a simple dinner from supplies I'd brought: a can of soup heated on the ancient stove, crackers that tasted like cardboard. As I ate, I tried to convince myself that everything had a rational explanation. The handwriting resemblance was just coincidence. I was stressed, sleep-deprived, and isolated, making me susceptible to suggestion and false pattern recognition. But I kept glancing at the journal on the desk, its leather cover seeming to gleam in the lamplight. After dinner, I built a fire in the fireplace using the carefully stacked wood. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the cabin feel simultaneously cozy and ominous. I tried reading one of the books from the shelves, a field guide to northern birds, but I couldn't concentrate. My eyes kept drifting to the journal. Finally, I gave in and opened it again, skipping ahead to see how far the entries went. Page after page of my handwriting, describing days I hadn't lived yet. The entries became increasingly desperate as they progressed, the handwriting more erratic. By the end of October, the tone shifted from warning to pleading. October 31st. It's been 2 weeks since I arrived, though it feels like months. The outside world continues to fade from my memory. I can barely remember Sarah's voice now. Sometimes I'm not even sure she was real. The journal writes itself now. I'll fall asleep and wake to find new entries in my handwriting, describing things I did but don't remember doing. According to today's entry, I walked the north path again last night and met someone. A conversation I have no memory of. The boundaries between self and place are dissolving. I am becoming part of this cabin, just as it is becoming part of me. If anyone finds this journal, learn from my mistake. Don't read the entries for future dates. Each one you read becomes real, trapping you deeper in the pattern. I thought I was learning how to escape, but I was actually creating my own prison. The only way out is to stop reading. Close this journal and walk away, no matter what it costs. Don't be curious about tomorrow's entry. Don't try to verify the predictions. Just leave, even if you can't remember why you came. But you won't listen, will you? I didn't either. Curiosity is both humanity's greatest strength and greatest weakness. I'm sorry, David. I'm sorry for what you're about to become. The final entry was dated November 15th, more than a month away. Just 2 lines in shaky handwriting. The journal is complete. The loop is closed. Welcome home. I closed the journal and sat back in the chair, my heart pounding. This was sophisticated psychological horror, but that's all it was. Fiction. The fact that it felt real just demonstrated the power of good storytelling combined with isolation and suggestion. But as I prepared for bed, I found myself checking the kitchen cabinet one more time. Still empty. The journal's prediction about the coffee beans had been wrong, which proved it was just an elaborate story. I brushed my teeth with water from the hand pump at the kitchen sink. Apparently the cabin had no running water except what came from a well, and changed into the pajamas I'd packed. The bed was comfortable, the mattress firmer than what I was used to, but not unpleasant. The sheets smelled of lavender and cedar, as if they'd been stored with sachets. As I lay there listening to the absolute silence of the deep forest, I tried to plan my next move. I'd explore the property tomorrow, take some photographs for the real estate listing, and head back to Portland by afternoon. The cabin was charming in its way, but too remote for my taste. Some city dweller looking for a weekend retreat would probably pay good money for it. I drifted off to sleep thinking about practical matters, property taxes, utility costs, whether the dirt road would be passable in winter. Mundane, rational thoughts that had nothing to do with impossible journals or temporal anomalies. I woke to pale morning light filtering through the bedroom window and the sound of something brewing in the kitchen. For a moment, I lay still, trying to orient myself. Then I smelled it. Coffee. I checked my watch. 6:47 a.m. I walked to the kitchen in my bare feet, the wooden floor cold against my soles.
The coffee maker was burbling happily, nearly finished with its cycle. On the counter beside it sat an open bag of coffee beans, French roast, the label still crisp and new. My hands shook as I opened the cabinet above the coffee maker. It was no longer empty. Inside, I found the bag the beans had come from, along with a selection of mugs I hadn't noticed the night before. Everything exactly as the journal had predicted. But I hadn't made this coffee. I would have remembered getting up, finding the beans, starting the machine. Yet here it was, fresh and hot and perfectly timed to my awakening. I poured myself a cup with trembling hands and walked to the front door. I needed air, needed to think, needed to convince myself there was a rational explanation for what was happening. I stepped onto the porch and breathed deeply, the cool morning air sharp in my lungs. The forest was coming alive with birdsong and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, a perfectly normal autumn morning in the Maine woods. Then I saw the cardinal. It was perched on the porch railing, exactly where the journal had said it would be. Bright red against the weathered wood, head cocked as if studying me. We regarded each other for what felt like an eternity, though my watch would later tell me it was exactly 37 seconds. Then it flew north, toward the path that led into the deeper forest. I stood there holding my coffee, feeling the last of my rational explanations crumble away. The journal hadn't just predicted the future, it had predicted my experience with it perfect accuracy. Every detail, every timing, every emotion, which meant the rest of the entries were true too. According to the journal, I would spend this morning reading more entries, then examine the shed around 11 a.m., despite the warnings. I would find surveillance equipment and photographs, including one of a man who looked like me, dated years before my birth. I could break the pattern. I could choose not to read the journal, not to investigate the shed. I could pack my things right now and leave before the predicted events could unfold. But even as I thought this, I knew I wouldn't. The journal had predicted my curiosity too, had known I would want to verify its claims, to understand what was happening to me. I was trapped, not by supernatural forces, but by my own need to know. I walked back inside and opened the journal to October 19th, where my future self was waiting for me to guide me deeper into the mystery I was already too late to escape. I spent the morning reading the journal entries for October 19th and 20th, each page confirming my growing dread. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, but the voice felt like a stranger's, someone who knew me intimately but had been changed by experiences I hadn't had yet. October 19th continued. You're reading this around 8:30 a.m., drinking the coffee that appeared mysteriously in your kitchen.
Don't bother trying to figure out how it got there. The cabin has its own logic, and the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can focus on what matters, finding a way out. But first, you need to understand what you're dealing with. The shed holds answers, but also new questions. The surveillance equipment isn't random. It's part of a system that's been documenting this place for decades. Someone has been watching, waiting, collecting data on everyone who's been drawn here. The photographs will disturb you, not just because of the familiar faces, but because of what they represent. This cabin is a kind of trap, but not the kind you're thinking. It doesn't just capture people, it captures possibilities. Every person who might have lived here, every version of events that could have unfolded. You'll see yourself in those photographs, David. Not someone who looks like you, literally you. Pictures taken in 1987, 1994, 2003, 2011. Always the same age you are now, always wearing clothes you recognize from your own closet. Because this isn't your first time here. You've been caught in this loop for decades, living the same weeks over and over, with slight variations each time. The journal exists because some version of you figured out how to leave messages for the next iteration. This is attempt number, well, I've lost count. The man you think of as your great-uncle Martin, he was you too in one of the earlier loops. He found a way to age out of the pattern, to become someone entirely different. But he never escaped the cabin's influence. He just became its caretaker instead of its prisoner. I set the journal down and walked to the window, looking out at the forest that surrounded the cabin. The trees seemed ordinary enough: pine, oak, birch, the usual northeastern mix. But now I noticed things I'd missed before. The way the shadows fell in perfectly straight lines despite the irregular placement of the trees. The way the undergrowth seemed to form patterns, as if someone had been carefully arranging it. And there, barely visible through the trees, was a flash of reflected light. Something metallic, hidden in the forest. I checked my watch, 10:45 a.m. According to the journal, I would investigate the shed around 11 a.m. I still had 15 minutes to make a different choice, to break the pattern. Instead, I found myself putting on my jacket and walking toward the shed. The building was larger than it had appeared from the cabin, constructed of the same weathered cedar logs, but with a newer metal roof. The door was secured with a padlock that looked substantial, but when I tested it, it opened with a soft click. Not locked already, or maybe it had been waiting for me. Inside, the shed was divided into two sections. The front half contained exactly what I'd expected: tools, lawn equipment, boxes of supplies. But the back half was something else entirely. Professional surveillance equipment lined shelves along the walls. Cameras with telephoto lenses, night vision scopes, motion sensors, and what appeared to be a sophisticated recording system. Everything looked well maintained, but outdated, as if it had been installed in the 1980s and never upgraded. But it was the photographs that made my blood run cold. They were pinned to a corkboard that covered the entire back wall. Hundreds of them, arranged in careful rows. All black and white, all apparently taken with the same camera from the same vantage point, somewhere in the forest looking toward the cabin. The photographs showed the cabin in different seasons, different weather conditions, different times of day. But in every single one, there was a figure visible through the windows or on the porch or in the clearing. Always a man, always alone, always the same approximate age and build. I pulled a photograph from the board and held it up to the light filtering through the shed's single window. The image was crisp and clear, dated in neat handwriting, October 19th, 1987. The man in the photograph stood on the cabin's porch, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked exactly like the ones I'd packed for this trip. His face was turned toward the camera, as if he knew he was being watched. It was my face. I grabbed another photograph, this one dated 1994. Same man, same face, same clothes.
then 2003, 2011. In each one, I was there unchanged, as if I'd been living in the cabin for the past 35 years without aging a day. But I'd been born in 1989. The earliest photograph was taken 2 years before I existed. I began pulling photographs from the board frantically, looking for some that didn't show me. There were a few, images of the cabin empty or with other figures visible in the windows, but those other figures were always indistinct, shadowy, as if they were somehow less real than the versions that showed me. At the bottom of the board, I found a manila envelope labeled Martin Chen Final Sequence. Inside were a dozen photographs showing an elderly man I recognized from family gatherings, my great-uncle Martin, but younger than I'd ever seen him. The dates ranged from 1962 to 1965, and in each image, Martin was performing ordinary activities, chopping wood, reading on the porch, walking the forest paths. But in the final photograph, dated December 15, 1965, Martin stood at the edge of the clearing, looking back toward the cabin. His face was clearly visible, and I realized with a shock that he looked exactly like me. Not similar, identical, as if he was me, but aged by decades of isolation. I stuffed the photographs back into the envelope and backed away from the corkboard. This was impossible. These had to be fake, manipulated somehow. But the quality was too good, too consistent. And why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to create false evidence of something so bizarre?
I left the shed and walked back to the cabin, my mind reeling. According to the journal, I would spend the afternoon trying to leave, only to find that the roads led me in circles back to the cabin. But I had to try. I had to test whether my future self's predictions were accurate, or whether I still had some control over my destiny. I packed my things quickly, throwing clothes and toiletries into my duffel bag without much care for organization. I left the journal on the desk. I didn't want to take it with me, didn't want to be tempted to read ahead and learn what other horrors awaited me. My Honda started immediately, the engine sound reassuring in its mundane reliability. I backed out of the clearing and onto the dirt road, following the path I'd taken the day before. The trees closed in around me, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the afternoon sun. I drove for what felt like an hour, following the winding road through the forest. The landscape looked familiar, but then again, most northern forests looked similar. Pine trees, rocky outcroppings, occasional clearings where logging had thinned the canopy. But slowly, I began to notice things that didn't make sense. A particular lightning-struck tree that I was sure I'd passed 20 minutes earlier. A distinctive boulder beside the road that looked exactly like one I'd seen at the beginning of my drive. A curve in the road that seemed to repeat itself with suspicious regularity. I stopped the car and consulted my compass. I'd been driving consistently south, the direction that should have led me back to the main highway. But when I looked at the compass, the needle pointed north. I was heading in the opposite direction from where I thought I was going. I turned around and drove back the way I'd come, but the landscape didn't change. The same trees, the same rocks, the same curves in the road. After another hour, I found myself back at the cabin, approaching it from the same direction I'd left. I sat in the car for a moment, engine running, trying to process what had happened. I'd driven for 2 hours in what should have been a straight line, but I'd ended up exactly where I started. The odometer showed I'd traveled nearly 60 miles, but I was in the same place. I tried again, this time taking the other branch of the road where it split. The results were identical. No matter which direction I drove, no matter how carefully I followed the compass, I always ended up back at the cabin. By evening, I was exhausted and frustrated. I'd made 6 attempts to leave, each one ending in the same impossible return. The journal's predictions had been accurate once again. I sat at the desk by the window, staring at the leather-bound journal. Part of me wanted to throw it in the fireplace, to burn it and pretend none of this was happening. but a larger part of me needed to understand what was happening to me. I opened to October 20th. You tried to leave today. 6 times by my count. Each time you ended up back here, more confused and frightened than before. The roads don't lead anywhere, David. They never did. They're just part of the illusion, part of the trap. By now, you're starting to understand the scope of what you're dealing with. This isn't just a haunted cabin or a temporal anomaly. It's something far more complex and far more personal. The photographs in the shed show the truth. You've been here before, many times. This cabin exists in a kind of temporal loop, but not the kind you might imagine. It's not that time repeats, it's that all possible versions of events exist simultaneously. In one version of reality, you inherited this cabin in 1987. In another, it was 1994. In still another, 2003. Each time, you lived through the same basic sequence of events, but with slight variations. Different details, different choices, different outcomes. The journal is how the various versions of you communicate with each other. Each iteration discovers it and adds to it, creating a collective memory that spans decades. You're not the first David to read these words, and you won't be the last. But there's hope. Some versions of you have found ways to break free, to escape the loop and return to the outside world. The trick is understanding that the cabin doesn't want to trap you. It wants to understand you. It's been studying human consciousness, human choice, human identity through repeated observation of the same person making the same decisions. The surveillance equipment isn't there to watch you. It's there to record the data for whatever intelligence operates this place. You're not a prisoner. You're a test subject. Tomorrow, you'll begin to understand the kind of test you're taking, and more importantly, how to pass it. I closed the journal and looked out the window at the forest, now dark except for patches of moonlight filtering through the trees. Somewhere out there, cameras were recording my every move, documenting my responses to an impossible situation. But who was watching? And what did they want to learn from me? I built a fire and made myself dinner, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in this increasingly surreal situation. The familiar activities, lighting the kindling, heating a can of soup, washing dishes in the hand-pump sink, helped ground me in physical reality. But as I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not by hidden cameras, but by something closer, more intimate. As if the cabin itself was observing me, learning from my reactions, preparing for whatever came next. I fell asleep thinking about the photographs, about the man who looked like me living through the same events decades ago. Had he felt the same confusion, the same growing dread? Had he also found the journal and tried to use it to escape? And if so, what had happened to him? I woke the next morning to the sound of rain against the windows and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Once again, I had no memory of making it, but there it was, fresh and hot and perfectly timed to my awakening. I checked my watch, 6:47 a.m., exactly the same time as the previous morning. I walked to the kitchen and found the coffee maker full, the French roast beans still sitting on the counter. But something was different. Beside the coffee maker was a plate of eggs and toast, still warm, as if someone had just finished preparing them. I looked around the cabin, but I was alone. No sign of anyone else, no indication of how the food had appeared. But it was there, real and warm and impossible. I ate the eggs mechanically, barely tasting them. The journal had predicted that I would begin to understand the nature of the test today. I was starting to think that the test wasn't just about my ability to solve a puzzle or escape a trap. It was about my willingness to accept an impossible reality, to adapt to circumstances that defied everything I thought I knew about the world. I opened the journal to October 21st. The food appeared this morning. You didn't make it, but you ate it anyway. You're starting to adapt, to accept that the normal rules don't apply here. That's progress. Today, you'll discover that you're not as alone as you thought you were. The cabin has other occupants, but they're not exactly what you'd call people. They're more like echoes, impressions left behind by previous iterations of yourself. You'll see them in your peripheral vision at first. A figure moving past the window, a shadow that doesn't match any object in the room. Don't be afraid. They can't hurt you. They're just memories made manifest, ghosts of choices not made. But one of them is different. One of them is still conscious, still trying to communicate. You'll know him when you see him, because he'll be wearing the watch your father gave you for graduation, the one you lost 3 years ago. He has information you need about the nature of this place, about who built it and why. But he can only appear when you're ready to accept that identity is more fluid than you've ever imagined. Tonight, look for him by the fireplace. He'll be there when the fire burns low, when the shadows grow long, and he'll tell you something that will change everything. I set the journal down and looked at my wrist. I was wearing my father's watch, a simple Timex with a leather band that had belonged to my father and his father before him. I'd never lost it, had worn it every day since my college graduation. But according to the journal, I would encounter a version of myself wearing the same watch, one that I'd apparently lost 3 years ago. Another impossible contradiction in a situation already full of them.
I spent the morning exploring the cabin more thoroughly, looking for any sign of other occupants or any clue about who might be preparing my meals. The building was small enough that there were few places to hide, but I checked every closet, every cabinet, every possible hiding spot. In the bedroom closet, I found clothes that weren't mine, but fit me perfectly. Jeans, shirts, jackets, all in my size, all in styles I might have chosen, but none that I remembered buying. Some of them looked decades old, as if they'd been hanging there since the 1980s. Among them, I found a flannel shirt that looked exactly like the one I'd seen in the 1987 photograph. I held it up to the light, examining the fabric, the buttons, the wear patterns. It was identical down to the smallest detail, including a small tear in the left elbow that I'd noticed in the photograph. I was holding a shirt that had belonged to me 35 years ago, 2 years before I was born. That afternoon, I tried to leave again, but this time I approached it differently. Instead of driving, I walked north along the path I'd been warned about. I wanted to see for myself what made it curve back on itself, what created the impossible geography that trapped me here. The path was well maintained, marked with occasional blazes on the trees. It led steadily uphill through dense forest, winding between massive pine trees that blocked out most of the sky. After about a mile, it began to curve to the east, then south, then west. I marked trees with my knife as I walked, just as the journal had described. But even as I did it, I knew what I would find. The path was leading me in a perfect circle, bringing me back to the cabin from a different direction. What I didn't expect was to encounter my own knife marks on trees I hadn't yet reached. The blazes I'd carved into the bark were there, exactly where I'd made them, but in the wrong order. The tree I'd marked first was the last one I passed before the path brought me back to the cabin. The one I'd marked second was second to last, and so on. It was as if the path existed in a different temporal framework, where cause and effect operated according to different rules. My actions had consequences, but not in the order I'd performed them. I stood at the edge of the cabin's clearing, looking back at the path that had somehow rearranged itself around my movements.
The forest looked peaceful, ordinary, but I now knew it was anything but. This was a place where the normal laws of physics and causality didn't apply, where reality itself was fluid and malleable. As evening approached, I built a fire in the fireplace and sat before it, waiting. The journal had promised that I would see another version of myself, one who could provide answers to the questions that were driving me toward madness. The fire burned steadily, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the cabin. I watched the flames consume the carefully split wood, listened to the pop and crackle of burning sap. Outside, the forest was silent, except for the occasional call of a night bird. As the fire began to burn low, the shadows in the room grew longer, more complex. And in those shadows, I began to see shapes that didn't match the furniture or the flickering flames.